Ryan Langston, the heir to the prestigious Langston Hotel Group, was living a dream most people could only imagine. His days were filled with meetings in glass towers and nights at exclusive events. On this particular day, Ryan was on his way to marry Scarlett Vaughn, a renowned lifestyle influencer whose social media following numbered in the millions. Their wedding, dubbed the event of the year by media outlets, was the pinnacle of glitz and glamour. As he drove down the winding mountain road toward the Grand Chapel, his phone buzzed incessantly. Ryan glanced at the screen to see Scarlett's name flash across. Sighing, he picked up. "Ryan, where are you?" Scarlett's tone was sharp, tinged with impatience. "The photographers are already here and guests are asking questions. We cannot be late. Everything must be perfect." Ryan tried to suppress his growing unease. "I'm just a few minutes away, Scarlett. Don't worry, everything will go as planned." "Planned? Ryan, this is our wedding. Perfection isn't optional," Scarlett snapped before abruptly hanging up. Ryan felt the tension in his chest tighten. For weeks, he'd ignored a nagging sense of doubt about the life he was building. The grandeur, the demands, the spotlight, it all felt suffocating. Scarlett's obsession with appearances only made it worse. Distracted by his thoughts, Ryan didn't notice the curve in the road until it was too late. His car swerved wildly, and the screech of tires gave way to a deafening crash. Darkness enveloped him as shattered glass and twisted metal became his last memories. Ryan's world remained dark for what felt like an eternity. When he finally opened his eyes, the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room greeted him. Machines beeped rhythmically, their sounds grounding him in the present. He couldn't move much, his body restrained by tubes and bandages. The accident had left Ryan severely injured, and he had spent weeks in a coma. Unbeknownst to him, the world outside had turned his tragedy into a media spectacle. Headlines screamed updates about his condition. Scarlett, ever the image-conscious fiancée, had made a few publicized visits, dressed impeccably and shedding rehearsed tears. But behind closed doors, her concern was less about Ryan's recovery and more about salvaging her social media presence. While Scarlett's visits were brief and self-serving, another presence emerged in Ryan's life, unnoticed by the press or anyone else. Elena Martinez, a humble hospital janitor, was the first to notice Ryan. Elena had come to the US from a small village in Mexico, seeking a better life. Though her job was demanding, she always carried a quiet kindness with her. One evening, while mopping the floors near Ryan's room, she caught a glimpse of the unconscious man lying amidst the hum of machines. Something about his stillness struck her heart. Over the following days, Elena began making small gestures of care, a single flower left on his nightstand, adjusting his blankets when no one was looking, quiet whispers of encouragement, spoken in Spanish, as if her words could reach through the fog of his coma. She didn't know why she felt drawn to Ryan. Perhaps it was her own loneliness, or the recognition of someone who seemed lost even while surrounded by people. Scarlett's visits, meanwhile, became increasingly sporadic. Hospital staff whispered about how she spent more time on her phone than at Ryan's bedside. Scarlett posed for photos, capturing them with messages like, "holding on to hope," but the sincerity stopped at the screen. Behind the polished posts, her patience with Ryan's condition was wearing thin. Elena noticed the stark contrast. Though she kept her distance during Scarlett's visits, it was clear the fiancé was more concerned with optics than genuine care. This realization only deepened Elena's resolve to show Ryan the compassion he deserved. One night, as Elena sat by Ryan's bed, she shared a story from her childhood. "In my village, we believe that even in the darkest nights, a small light can guide you home," she said softly, her accent wrapping around the words like a lullaby. "I hope my presence here can be that light for you." Days turned into weeks, and slowly something began to change. Ryan's fingers twitched, his heartbeat grew stronger. Elena's whispers seemed to reach him in ways no one else could. As the days stretched on, Elena found herself spending more and more time near Ryan's room. She tried to convince herself it was simply part of her routine, mopping floors, tidying up. But deep down, she knew she was drawn to him in a way that defied logic. His stillness stirred something in her, a mixture of empathy and a quiet hope she hadn't felt in years. It reminded her of her younger brother, Mateo, who had fallen ill as a child back in Mexico. She had stayed by his side through every long night until he recovered. That same instinct now guided her to Ryan's bedside, though she couldn't explain why. The hospital staff began to notice Elena's quiet devotion. "You're always around room 314, one nurse teased with a knowing smile. Elena flushed, mumbling something about needing to keep the area clean, but she couldn't deny the truth to herself. She cared, and it wasn't just out of pity. There was something about Ryan that made her believe he deserved more than the hollow care Scarlet seemed to offer. One evening, as Elena walked through the hospital's small courtyard on her break, she spotted a young boy with a cast on his arm, sitting on a bench, his face scrunched in frustration as he struggled to tie his shoelaces with one hand. Elena knelt beside him, her practiced hands making quick work of the tangled laces. "There you go," she said with a warm smile. The boy beamed. "Thanks, my mom's inside visiting my sister. She got hurt, but she's gonna be okay." Elena felt a pang of emotion. She glanced toward the hospital windows, imagining all the patients inside, some surrounded by family, others alone. She thought of Ryan and wondered what kind of family he had. Surely someone had visited him other than Scarlet? Yet in all her time near his room, she had seen no one else. The following day, Elena decided to check the vase of flowers she had placed on Ryan's nightstand. She often brought flowers she found discarded from other rooms, trimming the stems and arranging them into something presentable. As she walked in, she noticed the vase was still there, though the petals had begun to wilt. The sight tugged at her heart. "You deserve better than this," she whispered, removing the wilted flowers. She left the room and returned moments later with a fresh bouquet, this time made of vibrant daisies and wildflowers she'd collected on her way to work. Placing them carefully by his side, she paused, as if waiting for a response she knew wouldn't come. One evening, a new figure appeared in the hospital, a man in his late 50s, with sharp, angular features and an air of authority. Dressed in a tailored suit, he strode through the corridors with purpose. Elena noticed him as she passed by the front desk, where he was speaking with a nurse. "I'm here to see my son," he said, his voice deep and commanding. Her steps faltered. This must be Ryan's father, she thought. She couldn't recall seeing him visit before. The man, Andrew Langston, entered Ryan's room moments later. Elena lingered outside, her curiosity outweighing her better judgment. She couldn't hear much, but Andrew's stiff posture and the way he stared at his unconscious son spoke volumes. It wasn't the tender gaze of a worried parent. Instead, it seemed clinical, almost as if he were evaluating an investment that had gone awry. After a while, Andrew said, "Relena." Inside, Andrew sat beside Ryan, his expression unreadable. "You've made a mess of things, Ryan," he muttered under his breath. "Scarlett's been handling this better than I expected. At least someone understands the importance of keeping up appearances." Elena's heart sank as she overheard the words. She had hoped Ryan's family would be different, but it seemed they shared Scarlett's obsession with image. After a brief stay, Andrew left, making a call on his way out. "Let me know when he wakes up," he told the nurse. "I'll decide what to do next." Despite the discouragement of seeing Ryan's father, Elena remained steadfast. She found solace in small acts of kindness, bringing him flowers, humming softly as she cleaned, and sharing snippets of her life with him. She spoke about the colorful festivals of her village, the smell of tamales at dawn, and the way the stars looked brighter in the countryside. Sometimes, she read to him from old books she found in the hospital library. For instance, she didn't know if he could hear her, but it felt right, as though she were filling the silence with something meaningful. One night, while rearranging the items on Ryan's nightstand, Elena noticed a small leather notebook tucked beneath a pile of papers. She hesitated for a moment before flipping it open, her curiosity piqued. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, notes about potential hotel designs, ideas for charitable projects, and personal reflections. One entry caught her eye. "Scarlett says I work too much, but I can't help it. This company is my legacy, and I want it to mean something more than profit. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself in the process, though. I wish I could slow down, but it feels impossible. There's always another deal, another expectation. I wonder if Scarlett truly understands. Sometimes, I'm not even sure I do. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, when I'm at work, it's very, very difficult to stay healthy. Elena closed the notebook, her chest tightening. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of Ryan beyond the public persona, a man burdened by the weight of his responsibilities, searching for purpose. A week later, as Elena was finishing her shift, she overheard a conversation between two nurses in the break room. "Did you hear? Scarlett's been spotted out with some tech entrepreneur," one of them whispered. Elena's heart clenched. She had no illusions about Scarlett's devotion to Ryan, but hearing it confirmed left a bitter taste in her mouth. Still, she said nothing, focusing instead on her work. Later that evening, Elena sat alone in the courtyard, gazing up at the stars. She thought about Ryan's world, a world so far removed from her own. What would happen if he woke up? Would he even remember her? Would Scarlett swoop in and reclaim her place, leaving Elena as nothing more than a fleeting memory? "Don't get ahead of yourself," she murmured, brushing away the thought. "Just be grateful you could help." But deep down, a part of her yearned for more, a connection, a chance to be seen, not just as a janitor, but as someone who had made a difference. The breakthrough came on a quiet Thursday evening. Elena was wiping down the windows in Ryan's room when she heard it, a faint, raspy sound. She turned, her breath catching as she saw Ryan's fingers twitch. His eyelids fluttered, and a soft groan escaped his lips. "Ryan," she whispered, rushing to his side. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, but gradually locking onto her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his lips moved, forming a single, barely audible word. "Who?" Elena's heart pounded. "It's okay," she said gently, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "You're safe. You're in the hospital." Ryan's gaze softened, and for the first time in weeks, Elena felt a glimmer of hope, a light breaking through the darkness. As Ryan drifted back into a light sleep, Elena sat by his side, holding his hand. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she knew she had been exactly where she was meant to be. Elena's hope after Ryan's first signs of recovery inspired her to dedicate even more of herself to his care. She couldn't explain why she felt so deeply connected to someone she barely knew, but the bond felt real and unshakable. That night, as she left the hospital, she found herself reflecting on her own life. What had brought her here, to this city, to this hospital, to this man? Years ago, Elena had dreams of becoming a nurse. Back in her small village in Mexico, she was known for her natural ability to comfort and care for others. Her abuela had often told her, "You have healing hands, Elena. Use them to make the world better." But life had taken a different path. When her father fell ill and medical bills piled up, she had left her dreams behind to support her family. In 2009, Elena accidentally went ahead and got pregnant. Coming to the US as a janitor wasn't what she had envisioned for herself, but it had been a means to an end, a way to keep her family afloat. She thought of those dreams now as she walked the quiet streets toward her modest apartment. The idea of nursing felt distant, almost forgotten, yet being around Ryan had reignited something in her, a belief that perhaps she still had something to give, something to fight for. At the hospital, Ryan's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. While he still spent most of his time sleeping, there were more moments when he would open his eyes, trying to focus on the world around him. Nurses often commented on his remarkable resilience, but Elena believed it was more than that. She felt her daily presence and words had played some small role in his progress. One day, she arranged fresh wildflowers on his nightstand. Ryan's voice startled her. "The flowers, they're always different." Elena turned sharply, nearly dropping the vase. Ryan was watching her, his eyes clearer than before, though his voice was still weak. "That I thought I was imagining it," he continued, his words slow and deliberate. "But you've been here, haven't you?" Elena felt her cheeks flush. Yes, I've been helping the nurses, cleaning your room, just small things. Ryan's gaze softened. Thank you, he said, for not letting me feel alone. Elena hesitated. I wasn't sure if you could hear me, but I thought maybe it helped. Ryan nodded, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her again. It did. It does. Word of Ryan's progress quickly reached Scarlett. Though she hadn't visited in weeks, she decided this was the perfect opportunity to stage a triumphant return. She arrived at the hospital in a flurry of designer heels and camera flashes, announcing her presence to anyone who would listen. When Scarlett walked into Ryan's room, her practiced expression of concern fell into place. "Ryan, my love, you're awake," she exclaimed, leaning over to kiss him on the cheek. Ryan blinked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Scarlett," he murmured, "it's been a while." "I've been here every chance I could," she said quickly, brushing aside the implication. "You wouldn't believe how hard it's been. Trying to manage everything, keeping people updated. Everyone's been so worried about you." Ryan's lips curved into a faint smile, but his eyes betrayed his skepticism. He listened politely as Scarlett launched into a monologue about their future plans. But his mind drifted. He thought of the quiet moments in his room. Elena's voice, her stories, the flowers she brought. He felt more at ease in those silent nights than he did now, listening to Scarlett's carefully crafted words. Scarlett's voice pulled him back to the present. "I've already started planning the wedding again," she said, her tone as cheerful as if nothing had happened. "Once you're fully recovered, we'll make it even bigger, a true celebration of love." Ryan frowned. "Scarlett, can we hold off on that for a while? I'm not ready to think about the wedding." Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, darling. We'll wait as long as you need," she said, though her tone betrayed a hint of irritation. That evening, Ryan sat quietly, replaying the day's events in his mind. Scarlett's visit had left him unsettled. He had always known her to be driven by appearances, but now it seemed even more glaring. In contrast, Elena's presence felt genuine, unforced. He found himself wondering what she might be doing now. Elena, meanwhile, was finishing her shift. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the hall, she overheard two nurses discussing Scarlett's visit. "Did you see her outfit? She looked like she was walking a runway, not visiting her fiancé," one nurse remarked. "Right? And she stayed for what, 10 minutes? I don't know how Ryan puts up with it," the other replied. Elena bit her lip, her heart aching for Ryan. She didn't know the full extent of his relationship with Scarlett, but it was clear he deserved more than superficial care. Still, it wasn't her place to intervene. All she could do was continue to offer her quiet support. A few days later, Ryan surprised everyone by requesting to leave his room and visit the hospital's garden. Though still weak, he insisted on walking with assistance. The nurses wheeled him to the garden, where the fresh air and sunlight seemed to lift his spirits. Elena was nearby, trimming some of the flowers that lined the walkway. When she saw Ryan, her heart skipped a beat. He looked pale and tired, but determined, his eyes scanning the garden as if searching for something. "Elena," he called softly. She turned, startled. "Mr. Langston," she said, setting down her tools. "You're outside." "Ryan," he corrected, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And yes, I needed to get out of that room." Elena walked over, her hands nervously clutching her apron. "It's good to see you up and about," she said. Ryan looked around the garden, taking in the vibrant colors and the gentle rustling of leaves. "This is peaceful," he said. "I didn't even know this was here." Elena smiled. "It's one of my favorite places. When things get overwhelming, I come here to clear my head." Ryan glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've been doing that for me, haven't you? Clearing the noise, making things feel manageable." Elena shook her head modestly. "I just wanted you to know someone cared." Ryan reached for her hand, his grip light but sincere. "And I do know. Thank you, Elena." As Ryan's strength returned, he began spending more time in the garden, often timing his visits to coincide with Elena's breaks. They talked about everything: her family back in Mexico, his childhood growing up in the shadow of his father's expectations, their shared love of quiet places away from the chaos of life. One afternoon, Ryan opened up about his accident. "I was on my way to my wedding," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "But I didn't feel ready. I thought I was doing the right thing, living the life everyone expected of me, but something felt wrong." Elena listened intently, her heart aching for him. "Sometimes we don't realize what we truly want until we're forced to slow down," she said gently. Ryan nodded, his gaze distant. "This accident, as terrible as it was, it's given me a chance to reflect, to figure out what matters." "And have you figured it out?" Elena asked. Ryan turned to her, his eyes soft but unwavering. "I think I'm starting to." One evening, as the sun set over the city, Ryan made a quiet decision. He asked one of the nurses to bring him a pen and paper. For the first time in weeks, he wrote a letter, not to Scarlet, not to his father, but to himself. In it, he outlined the kind of life he wanted to build, free from the expectations of others. He wrote about simplicity, about authenticity, about love that wasn't built on appearances. Just because you're finishing a job, get that done too. People don't have to love you. When he finished, he folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside his bed. It was a small step, but it marked the beginning of something new, a life he was determined to reclaim. Ryan's recovery marked a turning point in his life. Each day brought new clarity and resolve, and he felt the weight of his old life, the expectations, the image, the suffocating relationships, slowly lifting. But along with this clarity came questions he couldn't yet answer. What kind of life did he want now? Who could he trust in this new chapter? People are making it look like the band is really the way out. One morning, as Ryan worked with a physical therapist to regain his strength, he caught snippets of a conversation nearby. Two nurses were chatting in hushed tones, their voices tinged with curiosity. "Did you hear Scarlett's been talking to reporters again? Something about an exclusive story on their love overcoming the odds." Ryan's jaw tightened. It wasn't surprising, but it was disappointing. Even as he grappled with rebuilding his life, Scarlet was focused on public perception. Later that afternoon, Ryan asked to be taken to the hospital's library. He needed space to think, and the quiet refuge of books felt like the perfect escape. A nurse wheeled him in, and he was struck by the warmth of the room. The soft hum of fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old paper. Ryan's gaze wandered to a small reading corner where a familiar figure sat engrossed in a book. It was Elena. She hadn't noticed him yet, and for a moment he hesitated, unsure whether to disturb her, but then, as if sensing his presence, she looked up and smiled. "Ryan," she said, rising from her chair, "you're getting stronger every day." "I'm trying," he replied, returning her smile. "What are you reading?" She held up the book, revealing a tattered cover. "It's an old nursing textbook. I borrow it from here sometimes just to learn." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Nursing? I didn't know that was your dream." Elena hesitated, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's something I've always wanted to do, but life, it didn't work out that way. For now, I just read and imagine." Ryan studied her, admiration flickering in his eyes. "You should do it. You're already more compassionate than half the people I've met in healthcare." Elena laughed softly, though her expression was tinged with uncertainty. "It's not that simple, Ryan. There's tuition, time, and I have responsibilities." "Sometimes," he said thoughtfully, "the hardest part is giving yourself permission to try." Elena's eyes met his, and for a moment neither spoke. There was something unspoken between them. A shared understanding of longing and second chances. Meanwhile, Ryan's father, Andrew, had been monitoring his son's recovery from a distance. He was a man of few words, but his presence carried weight wherever he went. One afternoon, Andrew returned to the hospital, this time with an agenda. "I'm glad to see you're recovering, Ryan," Andrew said, his tone measured, "but we need to talk about the company." Ryan leaned back in his wheelchair, his expression guarded. "What about it?" Andrew straightened his tie, his sharp features betraying no emotion. "You've been out of commission for weeks. The board is concerned. Scarlett's done her best to maintain public confidence, but we need to address the future. The Langston Hotel Group needs leadership. Ryan exhaled, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. I've barely recovered and you're already talking about the company? This isn't just about you, Ryan. It's about the legacy you're meant to uphold. You can't afford to be distracted. The word distracted lingered in the air like an accusation. Ryan clenched his fists, his mind flashing to Scarlet, to the headlines, to the life he was being pushed back into. Maybe it's time to reconsider what that legacy means, Ryan said finally, his voice steady but resolute. Andrew narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about? I'm talking about building something that actually matters, Ryan replied. Not just profit margins and headlines. Maybe it's time we use the company's influence to make a difference. Andrew scoffed, his composure slipping for the first time. You sound like one of those idealists who think charity will fix the world. This is business, Ryan. It's not about feelings. Maybe it should be, Ryan said, his tone firm. I'm tired of living a life dictated by appearances. If I'm gonna lead this company, it'll be on my terms. Andrew stared at him for a long moment before shaking his head. We'll see how long that idealism lasts, he said, turning on his heel and leaving the room. Ryan watched him go, the weight of the confrontation settling over him. For the first time, he felt the strength to stand up for what he believed in, even if it meant clashing with the man who had shaped his life. As the weeks passed, Ryan grew more independent. He no longer needed a wheelchair and spent his mornings walking laps around the hospital garden. He often found Elena there, tending to the flowers or reading quietly. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond pleasantries to the dreams, fears, and regrets they both carried. One day, Ryan noticed Elena seemed distracted, her usual warmth dimmed by an unspoken worry. What's on your mind? He asked as they sat on a bench beneath a blossoming tree. Elena hesitated, then sighed. I got a letter from my family yesterday. My mother's health isn't good. She's been having trouble with her heart, and they're struggling to afford the medication she needs. Ryan's chest tightened. Elena, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? She shook her head. You've already done more than enough, just by being someone I can talk to. I'll figure it out. I always do. But Ryan could see the burden she carried, and it stirred something in him, a desire to help, to repay the kindness she had shown him. He didn't say it aloud, but he resolved to find a way to support her, even if it meant doing so anonymously. Around this time, Scarlet reappeared, more determined than ever to reassert her place in Ryan's life. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, her designer bag swinging at her side. Ryan, darling, she began, her voice dripping with charm. I've been thinking about how to turn this whole situation into something positive. Imagine the headlines. A wedding for the ages, after tragedy. It's exactly the kind of narrative people love. Ryan stared at her, his patience wearing thin. Scarlet, I don't want to plan a wedding right now. Oh my God, she pressed. This is our chance to show everyone how strong we are together. Ryan shook his head. That's the problem. This isn't about us. It's about how we look to everyone else. I'm tired of living my life like it's a performance. Scarlett's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation. What are you saying, Ryan? I'm saying I need time, he replied firmly. Time to figure out who I am and what I want, and I'm not sure that includes this. Scarlett's face hardened. You'll regret this, she said before storming out. As the door slammed behind her, Ryan felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time, he had chosen himself over the expectations of others. The following week, Ryan called a meeting with his father and the board of directors. He presented them with a new vision for the Langston Hotel Group, one focused on community impact, sustainability, and genuine connections with guests. I want our hotels to be more than luxury accommodations, Ryan explained. I want them to be spaces where people feel seen and valued. We can offer job training programs, support local artisans, and give back to the communities that surround us. The board was skeptical, but Ryan's passion was undeniable. Andrew, however, remained stone-faced, his disapproval palpable. "This is a risk," one board member said. "Are you sure it's worth it?" Ryan met their gaze, his voice steady. "It's not just worth it, it's necessary. We've spent too long chasing profits at the expense of people. It's time we do better." Though the vote was contentious, Ryan's proposal ultimately passed. It was a small victory, but it marked the beginning of a new era for the company and for Ryan himself. As Ryan's recovery neared its end, he invited Elena to the garden one last time. They sat together beneath the same blossoming tree, the air filled with the scent of fresh flowers. "Elena," Ryan began, his voice soft but earnest, "you've been my anchor through all of this. I don't think I would have made it without you." Elena smiled, her eyes glistening. "You give me too much credit, Ryan. You're stronger than you realize." "I mean it," he said, turning to face her fully. "You've shown me what it means to care, to connect. I don't want to lose that, or you." Elena's breath caught, her heart racing. Ryan... Before she could finish, he took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Whatever comes next, I want you to be part of it. Not because I need saving, but because you make me better." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in something more. "I'd like that," she whispered. And in that quiet moment, beneath the shade of the tree, they began to write the next chapter of their lives. Together. As the days turned to weeks, Ryan's transition from hospital life to the outside world was bittersweet. His body was stronger, but his mind felt like a tangle of conflicting emotions. The freedom he'd longed for came with an unfamiliar weight, decisions he'd never imagined needing to make. Yet amidst the uncertainty, there was one constant: Elena. Their connection, forged in the quiet hospital room and nurtured in the garden's tranquility, had become a source of strength for both of them. But as Ryan prepared to leave the hospital for good, he realized that their bond would now face the challenges of the real world, a world vastly different from the sanctuary they had shared. One afternoon, Ryan invited Elena to join him for a coffee break at a nearby cafe during her shift. She hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate, but his warm smile and earnest eyes made it impossible to refuse. The cafe was small and unassuming, a world away from the luxury settings Ryan had once frequented. Its rustic charm reminded Elena of her home, with its mismatched wooden tables and the faint aroma of cinnamon wafting through the air. Ryan ordered 2 cups of coffee and a slice of pecan pie to share. As they sat by the window, Ryan broke the silence. "Elena, have you ever thought about what you'd do if you didn't have to worry about money or responsibilities? If you could just live for yourself?" She paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "It's hard to imagine that kind of life," she admitted. "I've always had to think about my family first. My dreams were secondary." "But what if they didn't have to be?" Ryan pressed gently. "What if you could study nursing like you've always wanted, travel to places you've only read about?" Elena smiled wistfully. "It's a beautiful thought, Ryan, but I've learned to be practical. Dreams don't pay the bills." Ryan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What if I could help? Not as charity, but as a friend. You've done so much for me. This would be my way of saying thank you." Elena shook her head, though her heart swelled at his words. "You don't owe me anything, Ryan. What I did for you wasn't about repayment. It was about being there for someone who needed it." "I know," he said softly, "but maybe it's time someone was there for you." Over the next few weeks, Ryan took small steps to integrate back into the world he had left behind. His first public appearance came at a charity gala organized by the Langston Hotel Group. Andrew insisted on his attendance, hoping to reassure investors that Ryan was ready to return to his role as the company's future leader. The event was a spectacle of wealth and extravagance, held in one of the Langston Group's most opulent hotels. Ryan arrived in a tailored suit, his posture confident but his heart heavy. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries and handshakes, but his thoughts were elsewhere. As he scanned the room, his eyes landed on Scarlett, who was posing for photos with a group of socialites. She noticed him and made her way over, her smile as polished as ever. "Ryan, you look dashing," she purred, placing a hand on his arm. "It's so good to see you out and about again." "Thank you," he replied politely, but there was no warmth in his tone. "How have you been?" "Oh, Scarlett said with a dismissive wave. "Keeping busy, staying in the spotlight. People are still asking about the wedding, by the way." Ryan's jaw tightened. "There's no wedding, Scarlett, you know that." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Well, you never made an official statement. I just assumed." He cut her off, his voice firm. "Assume whatever you want, but we're not picking up where we left off." Scarlett's expression hardened, but she quickly masked her irritation with a smile. "Suit yourself, Ryan. Just don't forget who stood by you when the world was watching." As she walked away, Ryan exhaled deeply, feeling both relief and resolve. The life Scarlett represented was no longer one he wanted, and he was finally ready to leave it behind. That night, Ryan returned to his apartment, a space that once symbolized success, but now felt hollow. The sleek furniture and panoramic city views offered no comfort, only a reminder of the superficial life he had been living. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the framed photo of himself and Scarlett on the nightstand. Without hesitation, he removed it and placed it in a drawer, shutting the past away. His mind wandered to Elena, her warmth, her humility, her quiet strength. They were unlike anything he had ever encountered. She had shown him what it meant to care, without expecting anything in return. He realized then that his feelings for her had deepened into something more than gratitude. Elena, meanwhile, was grappling with her own emotions. Ryan's kindness and attention had awakened feelings she hadn't allowed herself to explore in years. But she couldn't shake the fear that their lives were too different. She was a janitor, and he was an heir to a multi-million-dollar empire. How could someone like her fit into his world? One evening, as she walked home after her shift, Elena passed by a small community center offering adult education courses. A flyer on the bulletin board caught her eye: Introduction to Nursing, Scholarship Opportunities Available. She hesitated, then tore off one of the tabs with the contact information. The idea of pursuing her dream felt daunting, but Ryan's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the hardest part is giving yourself permission to try. So, like what you saw? There's another video on screen you'll love. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories.